In our program tonight, the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal decries Kgalema Motlante's decision to decline serving on the ANC NEC, while Trevor Manuel denies that he's unhappy with the party. The ANC confirms receiving Julius Malema's letter giving the party's Mangaung conference an ultimatum to immediately reinstate him. We also bring you the outcomes of two commissions that set today. One discussed economic policy and the other how to fix and reposition the party. Good evening and welcome to Dateline Mangaung, our daily wrap of the day's events here at the ANC's 53rd National Conference here at the Free State University. In our story this evening, the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal says it's disappointed that party former Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe has declined to serve on the NEC. Motlanthe made a failed bid to challenge Jacob Zuma yesterday. Speaking to our senior political reporter Tammy Dixon earlier, KZN Provincial Secretary Sihle Zikalala said that Motlante's stance does not help to foster unity in the party.
As the province of KwaZulu-Natal, I must say, we're a bit taken aback when the deputy president of the country, Comrade Kgalema, withdrew. Because we thought it would be good to have Comrade Kgalema, because we still respect him as a leader of the organization. If you say, I don't prefer you for this position, it doesn't mean that you disregard qualities of that leader. And it is in that regard that we thought having Comrade Kgalema back in the NEC would have strengthened that NEC, but also just a reflection of unity in the organization was primary and was important. So we think that's one shortcoming that happened in the conference, and for us it's a worry that we should have overcome. However, we believe that the product that will emerge will be a reflection of all sectors of the ANC, irrespective of perspective in terms of leadership preferences. And going forward, we need to unite. We need to close ranks. We need to build the ANC that does not belong to factions, but the ANC that is a truly reflective of a character of the organization.
Would you have supported him, Kgalema?
Obviously, he was. We discussed, we agreed as the province that if it does not make it in the top 6, he should be in the additionals. We would have supported him. That is not contested. And that was an agreement of us, and together with other few provinces we're discussing with, we were of a view that he should be given an opportunity to continue leading. Though he took the decision not to stand, we still believe he must continue playing a role in this organization. He has acquired a vast experience, and I believe the organization still needs him.
What's his future now? I mean, he's not part of any leadership structure now of the ANC. He's only left with 18 months in the deputy presidency of the country. What's his future like? Do you think he's going to finish the term?
Look, I don't think the future of cadres of the movement is dependent to their term in government. He is a cadre of the organization trusted by the majority of us as members of the organization. His future lies in the ANC. He will have to continue participating in the political body of the movement, including to be given task by the organization. And I don't believe that the new leadership of the ANC will have any problem with giving him responsibilities and tasks in the organization.
Should he step down now from his position as deputy president of the country?
That is not our view as the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. We will not support that view of stepping down. We believe election in the ANC should not be confused with a deployment to government. And those who were elected to government were elected in 2009 based on the manifesto of the 2009 ANC when we went to elections. And therefore, they are elected for a term of 5 years, and they should continue as a deputy president of the country.
The provincial secretary of the most powerful province in the ANC and currently the biggest by far. Well, Trevor Manuel has dismissed suggestions that he is unhappy with the party or its leadership. This after he turned down nomination for a position in the ANC's NEC. Manuel is a serving cabinet minister and is also responsible for planning.
Day 4 of a conference watched locally and abroad. Long queues of delegates snaking under a blazing sun, voting for the 80 members, Day 4
Okay, we seem to be having a problem with that insert. We will get back to it once we resolve that technical glitch. Well, ANC Secretary General Gwede Mandashe has confirmed that the party has received a letter giving the ANC's Mangaung conference an ultimatum to immediately reinstate Malema as the Youth League president. Mandashe says the letter, unfortunately, could not be accommodated into the program of the conference.
The letter from Julius, yes, we have received the letter from Julius. That letter came late on the 16th, after the program of conference was adopted, and therefore it could not be accommodated in the program of conference. As far as we are concerned, the disciplinary processes for Julius and others has been handled, completed. The disciplinary committee of appeal is the final structure for discipline, provided that the NEC can review the decision. So as far as we are concerned, that case was discussed, exhausted, and finished. Including the review. It has not arisen from the floor. A letter was smuggled into the plenary late on the 16th, after we've adopted the program. That's where we are with that letter.
Well, it would seem Julius Malema's fate is signed and sealed. Well, the conference adjourned temporarily for a good few hours this afternoon. This after organizers received notification that a storm was coming. Delegates and the media were evacuated and a media conference was hastily convened.
Better safe than sorry. The plenary session dealing with the meat of ANC policy was adjourned hurriedly. Delegates were advised to seek solid shelter. Those waiting in queues to vote for the NEC were also evacuated. At a hastily arranged press briefing, the ANC says it was warned to suspend proceedings.
Commissions have completed their work. In the plenary, they are supposed to report one by one on completed work of the commissions. That is what we're going to start doing in the plenary. The voting for additional members is going very well. I can't estimate how far it is. Therefore, what is outstanding basically is to ensure that we make up for the time for the report back sessions for commissions.
But some delegates did not allow Mother Nature to dampen their spirits.
We are quite happy about the progress that has been made so far. Discussions from the commissions, although there will never be enough time, but fortunately the ANC had an extensive policy conference, such that the aim of this conference was never really to rehash that, other than then to adopt those as recommendations and amend where possible, and also take original resolutions where needed.
The ANC says the storm will not affect the conference. Report backs by policy commissions to the plenary will be done tonight. It's expected the Economic Transformation Commission will recommend strategic nationalization. At this point, it's uncertain what this would entail. High mining taxes are also on the cards. This week, Deputy Finance Minister Dateline said there would be no reckless interference with economic policy. Solofelo Matibedi, SABC News, Mangaung.
Well, one of those commissions that are due to report back has already started doing so. Phoebe Potgieter, one of the rapporteurs of the Strategy and Tactics Committee, has just started a briefing to the media now, informing them of the outcomes of that commission. Let's listen very briefly.
Preface or an introduction in order to clarify some of the changing in the global environment, some of the changes in the national environment that the ANC needs to take forward as it plans its political program for the next 2 decades or so. And that's what the Strategy and Tactics is about. It's a long-term program of the ANC that set out where we want to go to, what is our political program, and how do we see our program of action as an organization impact on society. The preface to the strategy and tactics does a number of things. Firstly, it looks at looking again at what is the nature of the society that the ANC seeks to build. We're talking about a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic and prosperous society. But what the preface does is to then define what is the political context of that non-racial democratic society that we want to build, as well as what is the socio-economic basis of that society. And we talked about the mobilization of the nation around a common vision. That is part of what we need to do, that in 1994 the transition to democracy happened because there was a political settlement and a negotiations process that then agreed that this is the way that we move forward, including through sunset clauses, and that laid the basis for the transformation of South Africa in the period after 1994. What the ANC strategy and tactics documents say in 2012 is that it's necessary 18 years after our transition to democracy that we need to look at the fact that there are fundamental fault lines in our society, particularly around the issues of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And therefore, during the next phase, we must make sure that we're able to build national consensus about what needs to happen in the arena of socio-economic transformation to be able to move forward in a way that helps us to address those fault lines that I refer to. So it's talking about mobilizing the nation around a common vision. It talks about ensuring that citizens are able to exercise the full range of their human rights. It talks about popular participation, building an inclusive and united South African nation, and so forth. In the 2007 strategy and tactics document, we began to define as an ANC what is the character of the society that we build. We know that it should be non-racial, that we want progressive realization of socio-economic rights. But what is the basis of that? And our preface talks about that when it says that it's about firstly, based on the resolution of the historical injustice, that we can't look at the realization of socio-economic rights without understanding the history of South Africa. So if you look at issues of land, if you look at access to education, if you look at issues of underdevelopment, spatial patterns, you have to address the historical injustice. And our constitution of the country talks about that. And therefore, that program needs to continue and needs to intensify over the next 2 decades. But also, secondly, that we're talking about building a democracy with social content. So it's not just simply about first-generation democratic right, freedom of association, the right to vote, multi-party democracy, the rule of law, but it's also about a democracy that addresses basic socio-economic rights. And the document then goes on talking about a political system which places the needs of the poor, and a social security floor at the top of the national agenda, so that we will continue to look at those issues around how do we improve our health system, how do we ensure that we provide social security, that we improve social services, not just in terms of universal access, but also the quality of social services and basic services, and so forth. That we need to look at the economy, accelerated growth and development in a mixed economy, a democratic development state that leads sustainable change through economic development, economic growth. How do we use our natural endowments as a country, particularly mineral, but also agriculture? And then the quest for equality and protection of the human rights and dignity of all. So those are all part of what we're saying, that in the next period we need to look at building on the foundations of the first 18 years. How do we then move forward to ensure that we have decisive progress in all of these different areas? Let me conclude by saying that At the policy conference, we had a long debate about how do we characterize the next period after having done an assessment of the first 18 years of democracy. And the characterization was that we need to look at over the next decade or so about a second phase of the transition from apartheid colonialism towards a national democratic society that will ensure that we have much more decisive policies in areas where we haven't made progress, and particularly in terms of socio-economic development. The question about land, next year we will be having the commemoration of 100 years since the 1913 Land Act. What do we need to do in order to ensure that we address the issues of land so that we don't come back in 10 or 20 years' time and we still have the patterns of land ownership as we have at the moment? And similarly with regards to patterns of ownership in the economy, the levels of unemployment and the levels of social exclusion that we continue to face. So we are talking about a next phase, a second phase of the transition that will, over the next 10 to 20 years, look at all of these areas and look at much more decisive action and much more deliberate action to ensure that we make progress with these areas. Finally, the strategy and tactics and its preface then look at what are the areas of concentration that the ANC need to look at, and we've identified what we call 5 pillars. The transformation of the economy, looking at what we call the communication and the battle of ideas. The third area is mobilization and organization. And then the pillars around making sure that we have a democratic developmental state that's capable, that's effective, that's responsive, and that is professional. And those are the 5 areas that the ANC will concentrate on. And when we look at organizational renewal, that is also the area that we need to look at. How do we improve the capacity of the ANC to be able to, both in government as well as an organization, can take those areas forward in a much more decisive way than during the first 18 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are 2 ways we can deal with the subject matter, because indeed there's a relationship between the two, between the preface of the strategy and tactics as adopted at the 2007 Polokwane Conference and organizational renewal. So they speak to one another. So my own proposal, Comrade David and Comrade Phoebe, is that we go into the other matter so that when we take questions on all these matters that pertain to the organization. I hope we are all in agreement. Thank you very much. We will now take what conference broadly has agreed on with regard to the matters that we should take care of with regard to the renewal of the organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Jackson. Good evening. Just on the key question of organizational renewal, again, you will recall that the National Policy Conference adopted a comprehensive set of proposals which were brought to this 53rd National Conference. The first report I would like to indicate is that this national conference has embraced all the proposals from the policy conference on organizational renewal, the spirit as well as the detail. There were a few additional issues that arose. I'm going to take you through some of those. The key arising from our strategic thrust that we entering the second phase. We must usher our country in the second phase of our transition. At the center of that will be a 10-year program of renewal. What does that mean? In other words, the first decade of the second centenary of the ANC's existence begins with this critical focus on the tasks of renewal as contained in the report you should have of the policy conference. The first of those issues is what is called cadre policy. So it's a return to that issue of cadre policy. I know some of you who attended the National Policy Conference would know that we have said that at the center of organizational renewal is the question of cadre policy. So this national conference has reaffirmed that from the ANC standpoint, cadre policy is going to be a critical pillar of organizational renewal. And again, in the commissions, we came back to the conclusion of the policy conference that the problem is not cadre policy, it's what has been implemented in the name of cadre policy, when in fact it was the absence of cadre policy. And by cadre policy, that would have been defined as a careful and comprehensive political, ideological, academic, and ethical training of all ANC members, whether they are in positions of authority, whether they are deployed in government or not. At the point of entering into the ANC, that preparation must begin, so that all ANC members, there's 1.2 million members of the ANC. In the next 10 years, our goal is to ensure that we have improved their level of training in politics, their level of understanding, training, academic training, and there will be a lot of emphasis also on the question of ethics, because it is a central problem we have acknowledged. So that would be the first of those issues. It's not a new issue. It was agreed at the National Policy Conference, but this 53rd National Conference has reaffirmed that the NEC has been given an urgent task that in its first Lekgotla in the new year, in 2013, the NEC should adopt this 10-year program as it relates to cadre policy. Very, very concrete things that need to be done there. How are we going to ensure that of the members that we already have and the public representatives that we have, at least in the next 10 years, we are going to change their profile completely, to change the profile of an ANC member, not just an ANC public representative. The second area is on we focused extensively on the core values of the ANC. Again, you will recall that in the National Policy Conference, there were specific decisions that were made. And of particular urgency for the National Conference, this conference is the Integrity Committee of the ANC, the National Integrity Committee. The National Executive Committee has been instructed by conference on this matter to develop within 3 months and constitute the Integrity Committee within 3 months of the election of the National Executive Committee. Guidelines on the operations of the Integrity Committee as well as the committee itself should be established. So I know you are going to be asking the question. So in 3 months, the committee will exist. This is going to be a very important organ of the ANC. In other parties, this committee has played a very, very important role. And the best example is with the Chinese. That if that committee actually reaches a conclusion that a particular leader of the ANC who holds a position in the party or in institutions, public institutions, is not fit to do so by what has been brought before them, that committee will be able to recommend the removal of such a leader of the ANC. I think some of you know the Bo Xilai, the Chinese leader Bo Xilai story. It is an equivalent of that committee in China. The Commission on Discipline Inspection in China. Ours is, we call this the Integrity Committee. The second thing that the conference has agreed is that the ANC constitution as it is now has too many issues of discipline, and conference has noted that we keep increasing the size of the constitution. So what will happen instead is that there will be a separate booklet, which is a code of conduct, which will be produced within the first quarter of next year, 2013. So there is, because the National Conference has generally adopted the policy conference resolutions, you would hear, all I'm talking about now is time frames, because these issues were agreed within a particular time frame. So the NEC is going to be very, very busy in its first year in office. So this code of conduct will be produced. The rest are details that I'm not going to go through on matters of discipline, except that conference reaffirmed the need to instill discipline in a comprehensive way, take firm action, ensure that ANC members, as they enter into the organization, they are educated to fully understand the implications and the operations of the organization. And the last area I'm going to talk about, it pertains to a number of issues that are in this decade-long program of action. And the way we are dealing with these issues, we don't want to take you to the detail of the National Policy Conference. We make the assumption that you have gone through that. The National Conference has come to the conclusion, in line with the discussion document adopted by the Policy Conference, that the ANC has to undertake to put in place major structural change so that it has the requisite capabilities required of a governing party, including on how it organizes its headquarters, how it organizes its departments, as in the departments of the ANC, so that it is able to give effective leadership to the whole of government, but to different sectors of society. Now, some of you would recall that discussion document proposed a particular structure of headquarters. I'm not going to go into that now, but the conference agreed that as things stand now, we're going to jack up our capacity because we're lagging behind. And the second area is that the ANC has to reorganize itself to provide leadership to civil society and social movements. We have a range of forces that are emerging across the country, protest action about service delivery, and new NGOs are emerging all over the place, some of them taking up government failure issues, and that the role of the ANC is not to condemn civil society groups, especially those that are taking up issues affecting our core constituency, whether it has to do with education or health, and that the ANC has to structure itself in a way that it is in continuous dialogue with various social movements and civil society groups. And on some of the issues we may disagree with them, but we don't want to have an antagonistic relationship with civil society groups that are taking up real issues affecting communities. It must be them who define them. Those that define themselves in opposition to the ANC should be the ones who do so, because the ANC is a leader of society. And again, there are significant implications on the way the ANC is structured throughout. So there are major organizational design issues that the NEC has been instructed to look at, from branch level up to the provinces and national office of the ANC. That have to do with, I've already spoken about cadre policy, with paying attention to the literacy levels of ANC members, apart from political education, core political education. That we're going to have in this 10-year program, we're going to have a comprehensive campaign, literacy campaign. And obviously, the aim of the literacy campaign is not just targeting ANC members, it's to roll out this literacy campaign in communities, but it is our priority, particularly the 1.2 million members that we already have. We have a lot of delegates who are elected, mandated by their branches, sent to even a national conference like this, very committed, but who are often hampered by their level of literacy to participate effectively, who are good leaders in the sense that they are able to effectively represent the voice of the communities where they come from. But when you come into a national conference like ours, essentially they have limits. So we're confident that by 2022, when we have the next conference, in 10 years' time, in line with our program of action, we will also have a different caliber or profile of a delegate as part of the 10-year program. So that's where I would like to leave it, Comrade Jackson, because essentially those of you who have read the policy conference recommendations, all of them have been agreed. There's new emphasis that the NEC must implement, and there must be a very clear time frame. So that's where we are on organizational renewal. There are no major new issues in this area. There are no major new issues that didn't arise at the policy conference. I can also give you the taste of the debate. That you remember there was an issue about the precedence of the leaks. That matter has been settled. That we should, in the policy conference proposal, there was a big debate about whether the leaks of the ANC should have, we should call their presidents or they should be national chairpersons. That matter has been resolved by conference now. There's no big problem. The leaks will remain as they are with regard to their structures. But the critical question is they must enhance the ANC's ability to lead and bring about change. At the moment, there are shortcomings in the leaks, especially the constituent organs of the ANC, to enhance the ANC's ability to provide leadership to various sectors.
What's that?
There you have it live from the media center here at the ANC conference in the Free State. The rapporteurs from the commissions giving us the latest. Well, certainly you heard it yourself. Nothing has changed from the conference we brought you earlier in the year, which happened in Johannesburg. I want us to pick up on the pillars that Phoebe Potgieter referred to, the battle of ideas that is out there, and how the ANC is going to deal with that. Talking about a development state and how that it must be professional and dedicated to like serving the needs of South Africans, which is something that President Jacob Zuma alluded to in great detail in his opening address. With the ANC coming out of this conference, what is it that it's going to meet out there? In other words, what are the ideas that are out there outside perhaps of the ANC? Lebogang Pheko.
I suppose at the moment there's a bit of a deficit in terms of credibility, and I think there's the need to lift that deficit and really redeem it. One of the things that a lot of people are aware of or have a perception of is that this is, at the moment, is a party that's which its internal contradictions have really diverted it from its attention in terms of running government and running the states of, the organs of state effectively, and dispensing with the responsibilities and the dividends of citizenship that people expect in terms of service delivery, etc. It seems as though as well, coming out of this, there needs to be a very strong message that there's going to be a shift in iteration vis-a-vis discipline, integrity, the sort of words that Phoebe was using as well, indicate that there is the understanding internally that there is a poor reflection of the ANC out there. However, what is somehow lacking is a sense of definiteness and a sense of finiteness. And there's one particular remark that Miss Phoebe makes around having a 10 to 20 year plan, not even a 10 to 20 year plan, but that there's over the next 10 to 20 years, the ANC must see how it resolves economic issues, it resolves social inequality, and becomes the kind of professional, technocratic state that is capable of delivering. However, I think one important narrative that must be noted is that there shouldn't be the assumption internally that the public will give them the luxury of another 20 years to continue in the same mode of more of the same.
Prof, what are the ideas out there that the ANC is most likely to come across, and which are going to have a bearing in how they themselves apply whatever it is that they've decided here? Are there such alternative ideas?
Listening to Phoebe very closely, there's very little that is new in relation to what you had in 2007. It's a very familiar diagnosis of what the ANC understands to be the society they deal with, their own capabilities. I am battling to find the new ideas. But that in itself is not a big problem, if only the ideas
can be implemented.
were being implemented. In other words, if we were hearing that this is what we are going to do now to implement these things, I don't hear that. I mean, I hear the same old ideas being repeated again. I hear the same old sense of complacency that says we will be in power for the next 10 years, for the next 15 years. And maybe they know something we don't. But it is that's not helpful for the sense of agency that is needed. It's implementation. That's where the problem is now. It's not so much repeating the same ideas. I mean, we know these things that Phoebe was talking about. The fault lines that she was elaborating on are very well known. But what's the plan? Not a plan of another plan of another plan.
Second phase of transition, that term is back again, made popular at the policy conference.
Yeah.
Is it really going to have resonance among South Africans outside of the ANC?
Yeah, look, it is more of the same. I think, when you read even the NDI, you read Eye of the Needle, you read the second transition, you even read the latest iteration of the ANC's economic policy, then you cross-reference that with, for example, the National Development Plan and the New Growth Path. There's a sameness. And I think, I'll agree with Jiniko that it's not a terrible thing, because clearly the concrete conditions and the material facts that beset most people's lives in this country have not altered So perhaps it's not unrealistic for them to be consistently similar. But the issue again is that, yes, even though the second transition is a useful iteration of what is familiar and what has been a well-known diagnosis indeed, is whether or not people out there, you know, your ordinary people, your people who are going about their business hoping and waiting for this better life to arrive, whether it has any resonance or meaning anymore. I think especially because it's been so obscured by a sense in which there are no winners or no losers, as opposed to outside a narrow party political narrative. And I think what concerns me is that in all of this internal fractiousness, there hasn't really been a sense that there is a real narrative that speaks to a victor and a loser, who is the person in the community who has no home still after 18 years, the person who's got no access to social benefits, the umkhonu who's been waiting for her benefit for so many years, the child who is still walking to school 6, 7, 8 hours per day round trip. And I wonder whether the second transition for them is meaningful, given that their material conditions continue to be the same, and that their material conditions are actually used as fodder, a rallying point to evoke a lot of emotion and a lot of sentiment within the confines of conferences such as this, the relative comfort and periphery of conferences such as this, without translating into, again, I agree with the professor, urgency. We can't keep lamenting endlessly, and people out there, I think, are getting a bit tired of being taken for granted. Hence, they then declare their own second transition in Marikana, in particular forms of industrial action, in particular forms of community service delivery insurrections, which are really citizenship crises.
Second phase of transition, Prof, in the words, do you think those words will give communities something, or maybe will it give them the impression that the ANC has indeed changed?
Well, certainly the ANC seems to believe that these words are sufficient, a sufficient indication of change. The policy conference adopted them. But quite honestly, I don't think South Africans are interested in slogans and evocative phrases, new terminologies. They just want something to happen, really. So whatever you call it is in the end immaterial. People are not going to buy a new slogan, a new term. I think 18 years later, people are too impatient and too hungry and too destitute to be fed, just something called second transition. What is it? I think if that answer can be provided concretely in the lives of South Africans, then
and a lot more clearer than we had it
precisely
being introduced there.
That's verbose.
Certainly. I think that's where it's at. I don't think South Africans want any more philosophy around their condition. They know their condition now, pretty well.
Phoebe says that the ANC wants to build on the foundation of the past 18 years. What would those foundations be? Are they as obvious as the ANC seems to assume, that everybody has a common understanding of what those foundations are?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the underpinning of the narrative, the ANC narrative is the same, inequality, joblessness, social cohesion, the buzzwords which emerge, which would be more meaningful if, in fact, we could see the tangible outcome of what those buzzwords are achieving. And the notion of a common narrative is not something that is as problematic as a notion of a common solution that doesn't seem to happen. It appears that the narrative is a rebuttal for every demand that citizens are making in this country. Okay, so for example, people will be told that, well, there's a better life for all. And it's a narrative that plays out in the public domain. It plays out in the way that I think the ANC relates to its citizenship. And it relates to its members as though they are the recipients of great largesse, rather than entitlements that their taxes, in fact, enable them to access. And I think that the power dynamic and the shift in understanding that this fodder, this pool of people are really not a personal entitlement of the party, but rather that that the party is the recipient of a choice that people can make or unmake at any given time. And that doesn't seem to be coming across very clearly in any of the discussions that I'm hearing. Hence, the consistent reiteration of that which is known, as though that alone, that rebuttal, is sufficient indeed to prevent people from feeling unhappy, make them feel less hungry, make them feel that they are employed even though they are not, make them feel as though they have roofs over their heads even though they do not, make them feel that their RDP homes are arriving even though they are clearly not yet arriving, make them feel as though the benefits of this better life have become tangible realities, and yet they haven't. It's like a child being promised a sweet and being given a wrapper consistently.
Well, one of the programs that have been adopted here is Trevor Manuel's economic development plan. You will recall that there have been a lot of complaints, people saying, in fact, the Democratic Alliance, the official opposition, announcing a few months ago, talking about their own alternative plan, but essentially drawing from that National Economic Development Plan, in part because they say the ANC itself is in fact reluctant to embrace the policy. Well, in his opening speech here at conference, Jacob Zuma spoke of the necessity or implored the delegates to actually adopt that plan. Well, it has indeed been adopted, and the ANC is promising to work hard to make sure that the National Development Plan is embraced by everybody in line with the things that Phoebe Potgieter and David Makura spoke about there earlier. Well, earlier in the day, we caught up, Mbongeni Mutwa caught up with Trevor Manuel, and this is what he had to say about the adoption by this conference of that National Development Plan.
In this conference, we also have people who represent branches in the poorest communities. And part of the success of the plan is understanding that the plan will never be a plan just for government. It has to involve citizens who are actively involved in the issues that affect them in their everyday lives. And so, oversight in communities of schools and clinics and all of those issues become part of it. So you can actually work at both ends of the spectrum. And I think the message from the President is in fact that message. I know that in the commissions the ideas are being taken forward very strongly. So I think that the theme of the conference, Unity in Action for Socio-Economic Transformation, is in fact what the plan is about. And I think it's not something where people have to sit back and wait for government. We can be involved in the work of the plan, partly because the ANC has always said the people are their own liberators.
Manuel spoke to the view that Cyril Ramaphosa's election to the cabinet can only bode well for the National Development Plan.
It doesn't necessarily follow, but what I do know of Cyril Ramaphosa, on the Planning Commission, where he's been the deputy chair for the past 2.5 years, he's given an immense amount of time. I almost know when there's an email coming in at 3 a.m., it's from Cyril Ramaphosa, who's read a document and now is making a comment on it. He's missed very, very few meetings in spite of all of his other responsibilities. And so, his work on the plan, I think, places in a very good position. It allows the officials to understand some of the minute details in the plan, and that's what I'm hoping will be a big boost for the plan as well.
The former NEC member also spoke to the view that the NDP pulled all the different government plans together.
In part, it's about focusing on implementation, about government, about better government. In part, it's also about bringing communities involved into decisions, but in part, it innovates in the arena of policy, as we do in what we call Chapter 6, the rural chapter.
The National Planning Minister dismisses the view that the chapter in the NDP dealing with corruption will, once and for all, deal with the scourge.
I think the first point that the plan makes is that there must be consequences. I think that if people think that you can get away with stuff, then they do. There must be consequences for wrongdoing always. It's a way in which you hold society together. Secondly, We must strengthen the corruption fighting institutions. That's a second very important message. And we can't have a multiplicity of those institutions. We can't create a new one every time. But we must strengthen them, and then where there is prima facie evidence of wrongdoing, you've got to see speedy prosecutions.
Trevor Manuel talking about issues that I'm sure each and every one of you care about at the moment as our country develops and embraces all the good things that we hope and wish that it could embrace. Consequences for deviant behavior is what holds society together. I like the sound of that.
Well, I do think that it is a very important pronouncement, as it has been before, if you carefully analyze the resolutions of the previous conferences. Key is the courage to follow through on those. And that actually is a theme that runs through a number of policy positions that have been taken on the issue of unity and healing the ANC. It's not the pronouncement that whether the leaders will leave that particular position, will have the courage to follow through, even if it's a senior member.
Strengthening corruption fighting institution, and the point he makes that we cannot keep on creating these institutions, but we should support those that are there. I remember only a week ago, Party Secretary General Gwede Mandasha talking about how this conference should come out in support of, and he mentions those by name, including that of the Office of the Public Protector, because the impression out there is that the ANC is not as supportive of the Public Protector, perhaps because I mean, her office seems to be really treading on certain important people's toes.
Yes, it's an important message to send out that in fact these institutions are not running at cross purposes with the government. I think we've seen some very worrying excesses and oversteppings, particularly in relation to the Public Protector over the last 12 to 18 months. And, you know, the conflict between her and the former police commissioner would have been one key and prominent example of that. And I suppose as well, it also links quite nicely with what Phoebe Potgieter mentioned in terms of integrity and discipline. Again, though, there's a level in which one would wonder why there would have been any sense in which there's a contestation between these anyway. These are constitutionally arranged organizations and organs which are actually an extension of the business of doing government and governance effectively in this country. I think it's a very unfortunate trend as well that the notion that there isn't a sufficient separation of powers is another thing that really erodes the sense of integrity and accountability and governance, and that there isn't any political interference with these processes and with these sorts of institutions, and that they can be perhaps disbanded or interfered with at whim.
Dr. Figeni, well, the 10-year program of renewal that David Makura was talking about, and underpinning, or one of the things underpinning that is cadre policy. Is that going to deal, in your view, with the problems that Trevor Manuel was talking about there, around the issues around corruption, the issues around consequences for deviant behavior? Will that cadre policy address those?
I do think that it may go some way in addressing a section of those problems, but there is a mistaken diagnosis of the problem. At one level, we are told that people need the new members' political education. At another level, we're told that people who will have stayed longer are the ones who will be given a chance to lead. When you then bring under a microscope, you realize that it's quite a mix. Some people who have been in the ANC for decades, some who had recently come to the ANC, are the ones who are involved in some of these behaviors. So they need not to treat this as a recent disease for those who have come in, but rather as something which is impacting at all different levels and asking difficult questions. Under what conditions do cadres, even seasoned cadres, change their behavior instead of changing the institutions and transforming them?
Now, David Makura talks there about a return to the core values of the ANC. Is there an understanding? Is there a common even understanding of what those core values of the ANC are?
There might just be broad, alluded to sometimes, values of the ANC invoking Tambo, Luthuli and so forth. But in essence, those values and traditions, there's never been any specific understanding. Take the issue of succession. Take the notion which was invoked going to Polokwane that a deputy president, it follows, usually becomes a president. And when you scratch the surface, you realize that it has never actually been the case all the time. Sisulu was a deputy president of the ANC, but he never really became the president of the ANC. So some of these are invoked in a contestation, and they are articulated by different members of the ANC depending on where they stand. But the key thing is if they can code these and say, when we talk of the values, we're referring to the following. And not only that, if they can live these values and be very honest about them, rather than to use them as a tool of political expediency to hit back at your opponent and so forth.
National Integrity Committee, is that going to help?
Well, I mean, one of the things we're very good at this country, rather than dealing with rot or dealing with uncomfortable issues, is at throwing a commission at it. And, you know, there's so many different instruments that are at the disposal of both the ANC and the state to deal with getting to the root of, you know, diagnosing why particular behaviors keep arising. And I think that other than, you know, yet another commission, it would be interesting, as my colleague has said, to think about why these and how these systemic shortfalls arise, which enable either easy undetected access to resources, either easy undetected access to tenders, or the things that seem to give rise to a particular psychology and a particular psychosis in an institution, the entitlement to eat. That is far more important than throwing yet another commission at us.
Well, jacking up the ANC's capacity, one of the pillars of this 10-year program of renewal. I remember back when, after 1994, Shell House fully staffed with a unit dealing with economic policy and all these other departments. Jacking up the ANC capacity, is it going to help resolve some of the challenges that the ANC faces today?
It may go some way in assisting if institutional arrangement and focus on all different commissions or committees, because some of them tend to be there, but there is not seriousness in terms of the work that they do, or their work and input is not taken seriously. But remember, key to ANC is unity, because a divided ANC can never have the full capacity of its members. Once you have the slates, once you do have all the kinds of divisions, it means so-and-so is going to be kept outside these particular committees, even if they may have the capacity, but because they happen to belong to a wrong faction.
Dr. Fikeni Lebohang Peku, and of course Professor Tinyeko Maluleke was with us earlier. All thanks to all three of you, and that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Tomorrow morning we will of course be